We always remember the greatest college football teams of all time for their biggest wins, their championships, and the amount of NFL talent they fielded on one roster, and for good reason. These are the teams that make the sport what it is and raises the standard of what it means to win in college football. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have winless FBS teams who are unforgettable in their own right, just not for the reasons they should be. It's not easy to lose every single game you have on any given schedule, as even some of the worst college football teams of all time have managed to pull out at least one win. But the teams that manage to not even do that hold their place in college football infamy. My name is Caleb, and today we're going to talk about some of college football's winless teams since 2010 and how bad they actually were. Despite the 0 for record, some of these teams on paper shouldn't have been that bad, as there was some NFL talent there, but others would have you thinking about demotion to the FCS. We're going to talk about some of the winless teams of the last 15 years, some of the key games on their schedule, and if they were able to manage some NFL talent. Since we have a handful of teams to talk about today, let's go ahead and jump in. The 2012 college football season was one for the books. We saw Johnny Manziel become the first freshman to ever win the Heisman, Nick Saban win his second national championship at Alabama, and a handful of top 10 matchups that put some of the best players in the country at the time on the map. But down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, the Southern Miss Golden Eagles were busy being the only FBS team in the country to lose every single game that season. Not only did they manage to pull off an 0-12 record, but it is to date the greatest single season collapse in college football history. Not only did they finish the previous season ranked 20th in the AP poll and a record of 12-2, but they won the CUSA title and a bowl game. So what the hell happened between the 2011 and 2012 seasons? This was pre-transfer portal era, so they had a lot of returning production, there weren't changing conferences, and their schedule wasn't the most difficult. But one thing that has been a constant in college football is that successful G5 coaches, a lot of the time, will leave the smaller school for a bigger program. And for head coach Larry Fedora, it wasn't any different. He left Southern Miss after the 2011 season for the North Carolina job, and the Golden Eagles will hire Ellis Johnson, a move that proved to be a disaster. While they did manage a few close games, many of the games on their schedule saw them on the wrong end of a blowout, even considering the only ranked opponents they played all year were number 17 Nebraska and 19th ranked Louisville. After only one season, Ellis Johnson and his entire staff was fired, but they did somehow manage to have a few players that had respectable NFL careers. Linebacker Jamie Collins would go on to become an All-Pro and Super Bowl champ with the Patriots in 2015 and had a 10-year NFL career. And freshman running back Jalen Richard would also go on to have a 7-year career with the Raiders as a solid dual threat back. The 2013 season was the first time in the 2010s where multiple programs would see themselves reach the dreaded winless mark. While that year's college football landscape saw Florida State go on to beat Auburn in the national championship that year, the Group of Five saw two of its representatives sit at the bottom of college football. First, we'll talk about the 2013 Georgia State Panthers. For Georgia State, it's not excusable to not win a single game an entire season, but in this instance, you can kind of understand why. 2013 was their first year as an FBS program, and the Sun Belt Conference that year was actually pretty decent. Outside of the Panthers, every single team in the conference was bowl eligible by the end of that year, so for a first year Group of Five program, they did kind of have a bit of a gauntlet. Especially in their non-conference schedule, they had to play number 1 Alabama in Tuscaloosa, which is pretty tough for any program in the country. Led by head coach Trent Miles, 2013 Georgia State would also produce just a tad bit of NFL talent as well. Leading receiver Albert Wilson, despite their 0-12 record, went first team All Sun Belt and went on to have a 9-year NFL career after going undrafted in 2014. And starting kicker Will Lutz would also go undrafted, but has managed a decade-long NFL career, most notably with the Saints, and is currently the starting kicker for the Denver Broncos. 2013's other defeated team came from the MAC, as the Miami, Ohio Redhawks would go 0-12 themselves. Unlike the other teams we've covered so far, they were the first team of the 2010s to lose every game without having a single ranked opponent on their schedule. Granted, the MAC was pretty solid as a conference that year, but they were one of the lowest scoring teams in the country. There wasn't a single game that year where they put up more than 17 points, and in turn, head coach Don Treadwell was fired mid-season. The only player from that roster that I could find that played in the NFL was linebacker Bryson Albright, who went undrafted in 2016 but played 8 career games in the league for the Bills and Cardinals. By 2015, it had been almost 10 years since a power conference team went winless. Typically, there's at least an FCS team or an inferior Group of Five team on the schedule in a pay-to-play game that a power school can use as a tune-up game. For the 2015 Kansas Jayhawks, their schedule would fit that exact mold, but they lived up to their reputation as arguably the worst power conference football program of the millennium. While Kansas football has seen better days in recent years, 2015 was rock bottom. They finished the year 0-12 and played in games that were not even close to being competitive. In a Big 12 schedule that saw them play a top 3 ranked Baylor team, in a midseason gauntlet that included Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and TCU, the Jayhawks even caught an L to FCS South Dakota State during week 1 of that season. To make things even less notable, there was very little NFL talent on this roster compared to the teams we've talked about already. While there were a handful of players who had a cup of coffee in the league like wide receiver Steven Sims and Fish Smithson, taking everything into consideration, you could argue that this was the worst season by a power conference team in the last 25 years. The 2015 college football season would also see the Knights of UCF lose every single game that season. Even though their roster was not that bad on paper when you consider they had players like the Griffin twins in the secondary, they'd have a pretty bad fall off from the season before. They had 13 straight seasons of being bowl eligible under head coach George O'Leary and had even won the Fiesta Bowl just 2 years earlier. But those teams comparatively had tons of talent compared to this one, and with a lot of their personnel now either graduated or in the NFL, a fall off was kind of bound to happen. Their American Conference schedule that year was never pretty, as they'd only have 2 one-score losses the entire season, as 10 of their 12 games would end with them being defeated by double digits. At the time, UCF was considered one of the better G5 programs, and after the season, they'd hire Scott Frost, and 2 years later would post a 14-0 campaign and a Peach Bowl victory, one of the best program turnarounds in recent memory. And of course, I gotta mention Donald De La Haye, better known as Destroying, was also a member of the 2015 UCF roster. 2016 would be one of the only years of the 2010s in college football where every team in the FBS would win at least one game, but by 2017, we'd be back to our regular scheduled programming, and UTEP of the CUSA would be the culprit that gave us another defeated season. One of the worst offenses really of all time, they put up only 114 points throughout their 12 games. It's not easy to move on from losing arguably your best player in program history after Aaron Jones rushed for 1,700 yards and 17 touchdowns the year before going on to the NFL, but that kind of drop off is always inexcusable. Head coach Sean Kugler resigned from the team midway through the year because they were struggling so much, but to his credit, while he was head coach, they did have one of the highest average GPAs and graduation rates in the country, which doesn't necessarily translate to wins on the field, but it does count for something in my opinion. They had to start the year against that year's Heisman winner Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma in Norman, and after getting lit up by that offense, it was pretty much downhill for UTEP from there. Their only real bright spot of the season was offensive lineman Will Hernandez, who went first team All-CUSA and was drafted in the second round by the Giants in 2018. As the only NFL player left from that 2017 UTEP team, he's currently starting for the Cardinals in 2025. As the second team from the MAC that we're going to talk about today, the 2019 Akron Zips would lose all their games throughout that particular campaign. It was Tom Arth's first season as the Zips head coach, as he was coming in from the coaching job at Chattanooga. But as with anyone moving up divisions, that first year is probably going to be rough. But if there's a word that could describe a season more than rough, I'd use it for 2019 Akron. This was a very, very bad college football team. They didn't play a single ranked opponent all season and managed to only come up with one single one-score game all year. To their credit, it was to eventual MAC champion Miami, Ohio, but there was no NFL talent that could even save this roster. 2019 Akron was the last winless team of the 2010s, and the last winless team to play a full season for the next handful of years. But the 2020 COVID season, as you probably know, was probably the most unpredictable, uncanny, and unorganized season of college football of all time. So many teams were getting games canceled entirely. Some conferences like the Big Ten had canceled the whole season until that decision was reversed, and COVID ran through these teams to the point where players who would never see any meaningful minutes on the field were starting to become real contributors. As a combination of all these things, a total of 9 FBS teams would end their season with 0 wins on their schedule. To give more context, none of these teams played a 12-game schedule, but it featured a shift from multiple programs to where they are today. For teams like Kansas, which is the second time they've been featured in this video, it would be the last time we'd see Les Miles as a head coach in college football. They have a total of 4 games get canceled due to the virus and would obviously finish last in the Big 12 that season. For Vanderbilt, it was their last season with Derek Mason as their head coach before hiring Clark Lee, who would turn their program completely around a few years later. That season featured kicker Sarah Fuller, who also played for Vandy's soccer team, as she became the first woman to play for a Power 5 football program, as well as the first woman to score in a Power 5 game, kicking an extra point against Tennessee that December. And out of the Pac-12, Arizona would not only have one of the smallest schedules out of any Power Conference school that year, but it'd be the last time we'd see Kevin Sumlin as a head coach as the making of this video. The Wildcats would go 0-5, which included an embarrassing 70-7 loss to rival Arizona State in that year's Duel in the Desert game. ULM, FIU, Bowling Green, and UMass represented the Group of Five's winless teams that year, and similar to their Power Conference counterparts, the NFL talent was very sparse. The next few years of college football would see the talent levels shift in ways we hadn't really seen before, getting deeper into the era of the transfer portal and NIL. While some people feel like the Group of Five will get poached for some of their top talent because bigger schools have so much more money to spend, 2024 Kent State was not one of those schools. They are the most recent team to not win a single game across an entire college football season. In preseason MAC polls, they were chosen to finish last across the board, and they do just that. The worst defense in college football last season, they allowed an insane 44 points a game alongside an average of 513 yards allowed. The Flash's schedule would include a loss to FCS St. Francis out of Pennsylvania, and head coach Kenny Burns was let go after the season after winning a grand total of 1 game across 2 seasons. Kent State has never been a mid-major powerhouse or anything, but the 2020s has not been kind to them at all. As we've seen in recent years, if a season does end with a winless team, it's more than likely going to be a mid-major program, but power schools are obviously not immune to this either. I think we'll see this happen to less power conference schools in the era of NIL and the transfer portal, as it has been a while, but I guess we'll have to see. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one. It's not often we look at some of college football's most infamous teams instead of the other side of the spectrum, but they're still a part of the sport we love so much despite their losing ways. If you're a fan of any of these teams we covered today, if they haven't come up already, I hope better days are ahead. My name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.